Good evening everyone, welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight the 15th of April 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo. Tonight we'll be talking about a potential low pressure system that could be forming off the Northern Territory or near the Northern Territory coastline. And really that's about all we need to talk about tonight, as well as possibly the week coming up in rainfall. We had a quick look at the MJO last night, we had a quick look at what was left of Tropical Cyclone Ita last night. And really there's not much more to say about either of those things, so let's get into tonight's update. So you can see ex-tropical cyclone Ita spinning away out here on its way to the southeast towards New Zealand. It is likely to pose some sort of threat to the North Island of New Zealand. It's attached to a fairly vigorous upper trough here. Also, if we look further to the north, we still continue to see activity continuing over the Solomon Islands, also some activity continuing over PNG, and as we push towards the west, we see continued convection over Indonesia and East Timor, and we see overall fairly clear conditions through most of northern Australia. A little bit of a weak trough here through inland Queensland, creating some isolated showers as well. I guess with the cyclone season going towards a close, we do still need to talk about any potential convection or potential vorticity or spin in the lower levels of the atmosphere that might happen over the next few days and into the next couple of weeks. And the first sign of something happening is a weak area of vorticity here north of the top end in the Arafura Sea. Now over the next 5 days or so by day 5, by Sunday morning, we're expecting to see a weak low forming in this area to the north of the top end coastline. Probably not likely to impact too much in terms of the coastal region. You can see here most of the rain remaining off the coast, but it may create a good convergence area to its south, and that might encroach on the Gove Nhulunbuy coastline here of the northeast Arnhem Land. So that's something we will need to watch. Now, if we check out this system over the next 12 hours as we go into Sunday night, we see that the system tracks very, very slowly southwards. It got some fair winds to it, to about 20 knots to the south, about 20 knots to the north. So it is certainly going to look like a low there for at least a period. But if we look at the conditions overall and we look at what are the chances of it actually developing further, we have a look firstly at the wind shear values in the region. We can see that the system lies in a pretty small wind shear environment, or low wind shear environment. There is some moderate shear to the north and some moderate shear to the south, but overall the system as we head to Sunday, Monday and Tuesday lies in a fairly low wind shear environment. The other thing we look for is the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, and we can see here to the west of it some dry air trying to creep into the circulation. The system, if it was to develop into a cyclone, will require this blue coloring rather than this purple or maroon coloring, and you can see here this purple and maroon coloring is trying to seep into the circulation itself. So if we continue tracking the system out to day 5.5 or day 6, we see that on Tuesday the 22nd of April at 10 p.m, or even day 7 I should say, day 7, we see the system here to the north of the Tiwi Islands. Once again, its impact on the top end coastline, there is some increase in shower activity, but the really heavy stuff will remain closer to the actual circulation centre. And look, from then on, it is expected to push in a more westerly direction. There is a chance that this can form into a cyclone. Don't get me wrong, there is just a chance. It's not a high chance at this stage, but that's what we said about Ita when Ita was first signs of forming, or were about 5 days away, when we were saying that it may or may not become a cyclone, and then the signal becomes clearer as the time gets closer. So at this point in time, the signal is weak, but remember, the signal can increase as we get closer into the time frame. Remember, we're only expecting this low to form in about day 4 or 5, and then we're expecting it to sort of meander about in this area for the next few days after that. And then after that, in the longer term, there is just the slightest chance that it may form into a cyclone, and that chance may increase as we head closer into the period. On the GFS chart, we see that by next Tuesday, same sort of thing. The system lies out there just to the north of the Tiwi Islands, a little bit closer than the Euro has it, so you might actually start to see a little bit more rainfall impacting the coastline here, although not signified on the actual chart itself. but charts are notoriously bad at predicting rainfall, especially that far out. But if we track the GFS into the long term, and this is, I do caution you, this is long term, and it will change a lot over the next 5 or 7 days. But we do see a tropical cyclone forming on the GFS chart and eventually hitting the Kimberley coastline. But remember, that's a long way ahead now. We're starting to talk into next weekend, so really we're only showing you that for interest's sake. But just to be aware that there is going to be, or very likely to be, some type of low pressure circulation developing well to the north of the top end and expected to eventually move to the west. If we take an ensemble view at the European model, we can see that on day 5 we've got that area that could potentially be a low pressure system on the Sunday out here to the north of the top end coastline. The other big area we need to watch is this area here, because this could actually be, in fact, this has a higher likelihood of becoming Tropical Cyclone Frank rather than this one here, because it may get in a little bit earlier. Now, if this forms just east of the 90-degree mark, it will be named by Australia, and it will be one of the WA cyclones for the year, even though it is unlikely to affect the WA coast at all in the long run either. So, folks, this is one to watch as the next Australian system, but not going to impact any of the mainland parts of Australia, and probably unlikely to impact any of the islands of Australia. But we will keep an eye, particularly on Cocos Island there, which is a little bit west of Christmas Island. We will keep an eye on whether or not this system may affect them. By day 6, we see a lot more confidence in the model forecast of a tropical lower cyclone forming out here in the central Indian Ocean. And we also see a little bit more variance in the guidance out here over the northern reaches of the top end and Arafura Sea, because we actually start to see some of the models that do develop a low make it even into a slightly deeper system, so slightly more significant system as we head to next Monday. So by next Tuesday, most of the guidance has this particular system, if it is a cyclone, has now weakened into a trough system on the Tuesday and is now pushing in a southeast direction towards WA as a trough system, not as a cyclone. So that's what most of the guidance in the Euro suggests. In the Arafura Sea, we see this continual area of potential low pressure system formation pushing a little bit further to the west as we head to the Tuesday next week. And just for a look into the future, if we look at day 10 of the model forecast, we can see there's a fair amount of variability here, but overall that low off the top end coast could be located out here off the Kimberley coast. It could even be a significant little low, possibly even a weak little cyclone out here by day 10 on the Friday the 25th of April, Anzac Day, and so we could see the system out here and actually quite a system of interest by that stage. But look, that is 10 days ahead, and we don't like looking that far ahead with any certainty. We just like to give you a bit of a heads up as to what could happen, but overall expecting maybe a weak low out here, but there is just those a couple of model members suggesting a tropical cyclone strength system. If we look at the GFS model is still hell-bent on developing something out here in the Solomon Islands or the Solomon Sea and pushing it in a southerly direction. That's the last thing these islands need, is more lows developing in their region. So I guess we'll have to watch the Solomon Islands situation with a bit of interest as well, because if that does eventuate, we could be seeing some extreme rainfalls again developing in these islands off PNG and in the Solomons themselves. That particular system is unlikely to come towards Australia. If we look at the spaghetti plot for next Wednesday, we see that the most likely movement there is south, parallel to the coastline, and then as we head to day 9, we see that overall the system starts to track away from the Queensland coast in a southeast direction, and then as we head to day 10, overall the system is going out towards Fiji. Some guidance is suggesting a new low developing in that area, but look, the GFS that far out tends to be quite unreliable, and even if a new low does form out there, it is once again likely to push south and southeast based on the mid-level flow at the time. So once it gets this far though, you can see this looks like a kid drew this diagram with too many crayons. So that just shows you that there's very little evidence, definitive evidence of what could be going on by that stage. But up until day 7, we do see overall the guidance suggesting perhaps a weak low developing here. Interestingly, on the GFS ensemble, they're not really intent on developing that low out here off the WA coastline until around about day 12. So they've got basically nothing out here until about day 12, which is the next, or day 13 even, which is the Sunday next week. So Sunday next weekend, not this weekend, is when the GFS model starts to pick up this low out here off the WA coastline. But once again, folks, take that with a grain of salt. Remember, we are looking that far ahead, and we are looking at late in the season now. So it's not to the point isn't the fact that the sea surface temperatures aren't warm enough. They are. They will sustain a cyclone anywhere out here in the northern Coral Sea, anywhere in the Gulf, anywhere in the Arafura, anywhere out here in the Southeast Indian Ocean. They'll sustain a cyclone, don't worry about that, even late in the season. But the issue becomes a lot of dry air and a lot of wind shear that kicks into this region now because we're starting to get into a winter pattern. So it becomes a lot harder for cyclones to find the other conditions necessary for them to be in a favourable environment to form and deepen. Looking also at the NavGem model, which did pretty well with Tropical Cyclone Ida. It's not really one of the better global models, but it actually did quite well with Ida's track. So if we look at that one, it's also got a very weak low developing in the Northern Territory or in the Arafura Sea out here as we head to early next week. So folks, as far as the east coast of Queensland is concerned, the cyclone season does, touch wood, look to be at an end. However, as far as the west coast and the north coast of Australia goes, there might still be one little trick up its sleeve before the season is over. So, tomorrow's rainfall. Let's have a look at it. Tomorrow's rainfall, we're expecting to see some rain here on the western peninsula. We're expecting to see some isolated showers along the tropical coastline. Also some lingering instability in through here in the northern inland parts of Queensland, resulting in some isolated showers. The top end of the coast at this stage, most of the shower and storm activity, albeit isolated, will be north of the coastline. There might still be the odd chance of something out here in the extreme northern edge of the coastline, but overall most of that will be out away from the coastline itself. So that's tomorrow. As we head to Thursday, we'll see this area of instability in the Gulf country pushing westward. So we start to see some model guidance suggesting that the northeastern parts of the Northern Territory will see an increase in rainfall activity. We'll also see that lingering instability pushing westwards, and the edge of the instability pushing westwards, and possibly even impacting Darwin with an isolated shower or storm on the Thursday. Some isolated showers continuing for the tropical coastline, possibly even just on the ranges here in Queensland, as well as the peninsula of Queensland, the North Peninsula of Queensland. That area of shower and storm activity over the northern inland parts of Queensland peters out on the Thursday. On the Friday, we're going to see that area of instability continuing to push westwards, and left in its wake here as that area of instability pushes westwards across the Arafura Sea to lie north of the top end on Friday. We're actually going to see a nice little moist northeast to southeasterly convergence zone developing out here, which is quite late in the season to see that, but certainly not unheard of. So the northeastern parts of the Arnhem Land district could be seeing some fairly decent rainfall there for this time of year. Also, the northern top end coastline could be in for some shower and storm activity. Now, that all depends on how close this little weak circulation lies by Friday. If it lies a little closer to the coast, that convergence zone will actually hit the coast. If it lies a little further to the north, that convergence zone will be very, very close but miss the coast overall. Over Queensland, those isolated showers and isolated showers on the tropical coast weaken a little bit, so the flow turns a little bit drier, turns a little bit weaker, so mostly fine conditions all over Queensland at that stage. WA still bone dry. By the weekend, we see considerable disagreement in the model guidance as to where the low over the Arafura Sea will lie, and we also see disagreement with regards to the Solomon Islands. So a lot of this rainfall is dependent on the Solomon Islands circulation developing. If it doesn't develop, then we won't see this rainfall developing in here. And also up here in the northern top end coastline, if that low pushes a little bit further to the south, we might actually see some of this rain actually hitting the coast as opposed to being mostly off the coast. So folks, that's the next 4 days. The 4 days after that could be a very interesting story for the Northern Territory particularly. Quite boring here for Queensland, quite boring for WA, but the Northern Territory could see some really intense rainfall just off its coastline, and it won't take very much for for that rainfall to push onshore. So just be aware that this increase in activity in the Arafura Sea could still impact the far northern coastline of the territory. Now, remembering that whole area of instability and low pressure development will push to the west, and as I say, there is just that slim chance at this stage of that forming into a cyclone later next week. But remember, that is just a slim chance, and we'll keep an eye on it as we head towards later this week and into early next week as the situation becomes a little bit clearer for us. Also, this area over the Coral Sea, remember, is still highly varied depending on which model guidance you look at. Most of the models don't have anything forming here, but there is that GFS model outlier which suggests that constant tropical low formation out here in the Solomon Sea. Remembering again, of course, that if a low or cyclone does develop out here in the next week or so, it's unlikely to hit Queensland. It's more likely to push in a south and then southeast direction away from the coast. Alright folks, thanks very much for watching tonight. Our next update now, with no cyclone approaching the Australian coastline and no real awesome weather to speak of. So our next update to you will be on Friday night, the 18th of April. Stay watching our social media. We'll have more and more videos coming from Tropical Cyclone Ida from our chase. And so if you want to keep up to date with those, subscribe to our Facebook feed or purchase our app, and you can have our Facebook feed even if you don't have Facebook. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again on Friday night. Good night.